At the restaurant, my daughter-in-law yelled at the waiter, "Remove this raggedy woman from our table." She didn't know it was my restaurant. The next day she got a new position, bathroom cleaner. The proud one earned it. My name is Margaret Whitfield, and I'm 63 years old. I've been running restaurants for over 30 years now, ever since my late husband Robert and I opened our first little diner back in 1992. Today I own 3 establishments in downtown Portland. But the one closest to my heart is Magnolia's, a cozy family restaurant that serves comfort food and creates memories for generations of local families. I never expected that my own family would become the source of my biggest heartbreak and, eventually, my greatest triumph. It all started on a Tuesday evening in March. The spring rain was tapping against the windows of my house, creating that familiar Portland symphony I've grown to love over the decades. I was sitting in my living room, knitting a baby blanket for my neighbor's granddaughter, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from my son, Michael. "Mom, can you meet us for dinner tomorrow at 7? Jessica really wants to try that new place downtown." Michael is my only child, and at 35, he's everything a mother could be proud of. Tall, handsome, with his father's kind eyes and my stubborn chin. He works as a software engineer at one of those tech companies that seem to multiply like mushrooms after rain here in Oregon. 3 years ago, he married Jessica, a woman I thought would be the perfect addition to our small family. Jessica Chen Morrison, she kept both names after marriage, which I respected, is 28, beautiful in that effortless way some women have. Long black hair, always perfectly styled, designer clothes that probably cost more than most people's rent. She works in marketing for a luxury cosmetics company, and from day one, she made it clear that she was accustomed to the finer things in life. I'll be honest, I had my reservations about Jessica from the beginning. Not because she wasn't good enough for Michael, but because something about her felt calculated. The way she would compliment my cooking while barely touching her food. How she'd smile at my stories about the restaurant business while her eyes wandered to her phone. Small things that a mother notices, but can't quite put into words without sounding petty. But Michael was happy, and that's what mattered to me. Or at least, that's what I told myself. The next evening, I drove downtown through the usual Portland traffic. The city was alive with its Wednesday night energy. Food trucks lined up along the blocks, street musicians playing for spare change. Young couples walking hand in hand under the soft glow of vintage street lamps. I found parking 2 blocks away from the restaurant Jessica had chosen. Bella Vista, an upscale Italian place that had opened 6 months ago. As I walked toward the restaurant, I couldn't help but notice the contrast between Bella Vista and my own Magnolia's, where my place had warm wood paneling and family photos covering the walls. Bella Vista was all sleek lines and modern art. The kind of place where you pay $40 for a plate of pasta because it comes with a fancy name and mood lighting. I spotted Michael and Jessica through the large windows before I even entered. They were seated at a corner table, and I could see Jessica gesturing animatedly while Michael nodded along. She was wearing a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. Her hair pulled back in an elegant chignon that showed off diamond earrings that caught the restaurant's ambient lighting. The hostess, a young woman with purple streaks in her blonde hair and a nervous smile, greeted me at the door. "Welcome to Bella Vista. Do you have a reservation?" "I'm meeting my son and daughter-in-law," I said, pointing toward their table, the couple in the corner. She glanced over, and her expression shifted slightly. "Oh, you're with the Morrison party. Right this way, please." As we walked through the restaurant, I noticed how different the atmosphere was from my own place. The conversations were quieter, more subdued. People seemed to be performing rather than just enjoying a meal. Everything felt staged, from the perfectly arranged flowers on each table to the way the waitstaff glided between tables like they were dancing a choreographed routine. Michael stood up when he saw me approaching, his face breaking into that genuine smile that reminded me so much of his father. "Mom, you made it." I was starting to worry about the traffic. Jessica remained seated, offering me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Margaret, you look lovely tonight. I love that sweater. It's so vintage." I chose to take it as a compliment, though something in her tone made me wonder if it was meant as one. I was wearing my favorite burgundy cardigan, one I'd had for 15 years, but kept in perfect condition. It was comfortable and practical, qualities I'd learned to value over flash. "Thank you, dear. This is quite a place you've chosen. Very elegant. I thought it would be nice to try somewhere new," Jessica said, finally standing to give me a brief hug that felt more like a social obligation than genuine affection. The reviews online are incredible. 5 stars across the board. We settled into our seats, and I found myself studying the menu with a mixture of curiosity and professional interest. As someone who's been in the restaurant business for 3 decades, I can't help but analyze other establishments. The prices were astronomical. $28 for a Caesar salad, $36 for chicken parmesan, but the descriptions were certainly creative, turning simple dishes into elaborate culinary adventures with words like artisanal and locally sourced and handcrafted. Our waiter appeared, a young man in his early 20s with perfectly styled hair and a smile that seemed practiced. He introduced himself as Trevor and began reciting the evening's specials with the enthusiasm of a theater student performing Shakespeare. "Can I start you ladies and gentlemen off with some appetizers? Our truffle bruschetta is particularly popular tonight, and our chef's special burrata is made fresh daily with organic tomatoes from a local farm just outside the city." Michael and Jessica ordered a bottle of wine that cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget, while I stuck with water. We selected our entrees. Michael chose the seafood risotto, Jessica opted for the grilled salmon with quinoa, and I decided on the chicken marsala, curious to see how it compared to the version we served at Magnolia's. As we waited for our food, Jessica dominated the conversation, telling us about her latest project at work, a campaign for a new line of anti-aging serums that promised to turn back time itself. She spoke with the kind of confidence that comes from never having been truly challenged, describing her ideas as revolutionary and game-changing. Michael listened with the patient attention of a man who'd heard similar stories many times before, occasionally asking questions that showed he was genuinely trying to be supportive. I found myself studying their dynamic, noticing small things that a mother picks up on. The way Jessica barely looked at Michael when she spoke, how she would pause her stories whenever the waiter appeared, as if his presence was more important than her husband's attention. "And then," Jessica continued, "I told the creative director that we needed to target women who aren't afraid to invest in themselves. Women who understand that looking good is an investment in their future success. You know what I mean, Margaret?" I nodded politely, though I wasn't entirely sure I did know what she meant. In my world, success came from hard work, treating people with respect, and building something meaningful. But I kept these thoughts to myself. The food arrived, and I have to admit, it was beautifully presented. My chicken marsala came on a white plate so large it could have doubled as a dinner platter, with the chicken arranged artfully alongside perfectly uniform vegetables that looked more like decoration than food. It tasted good, though I couldn't help but think about how the same dish at Magnolia's had more flavor and cost half the price. Jessica barely touched her salmon, pushing it around her plate while continuing to talk about work, her upcoming business trip to Los Angeles, and the new apartment complex she and Michael were considering. Everything in her world seemed to revolve around status and appearance, and I found myself wondering what she and my son actually talked about when they were alone. "Mom," Michael said during a brief pause in Jessica's monologue, "how are things at the restaurant? You've been working so hard lately." "Oh, you know how it is," I replied, grateful for his interest. "Spring is always busy. We're getting ready for the graduation season, and I'm training 2 new servers. It keeps me on my toes." Jessica's expression shifted slightly, as if she'd suddenly remembered something unpleasant. "Margaret, I've been meaning to ask you, have you ever considered selling the restaurant? I mean, at your age, wouldn't it be nice to retire and enjoy life a little?" The question caught me off guard, not just because of its directness, but because of the assumption behind it, that my work wasn't part of enjoying life, that what I'd built over 30 years was just a burden to be discarded. "Magnolia's is my life," I said carefully. "It's not just a business. It's a place where families gather, where people celebrate milestones, where the community comes together. I can't imagine giving that up." "But think about the freedom you'd have," Jessica pressed on. "You could travel, relax, spend more time with us. And the property value in that area has gone up significantly. You could probably get a really good price for it." I felt Michael's eyes on me, and I could see the conflict in his expression. He loved the restaurant almost as much as I did. It was where he'd learned his work ethic, where he'd had his first job bussing tables, where he'd brought his high school girlfriends to meet me. But I could also see that he was trying to navigate between his mother and his wife, a position no child should have to be in. "I'm not ready to retire," I said firmly. "Maybe someday, but not now. There's still too much I want to accomplish." Jessica nodded, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. She had that look people get when they're planning something, when they've decided that what you want doesn't align with what they think is best for you. The rest of dinner passed pleasantly enough, though I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. Jessica was charming and attentive, asking about my hobbies and my health. But it felt like a performance, like she was checking boxes on a list of things a good daughter-in-law should do. As we prepared to leave, Jessica excused herself to use the restroom, and Michael and I had a moment alone. "She means well, Mom," he said quietly. "She just worries about you working so much at your age." "I know, sweetheart, but I hope you understand why the restaurant means so much to me." "Of course I do. It's where I learned everything important about life, about work, about treating people with respect, about building something that matters." His words warmed my heart, but they also made me sad, because I could see the distance that was growing between the values he'd been raised with and the life he was building with Jessica. It wasn't his fault. Love makes us all try to bridge impossible gaps sometimes. Jessica returned, and we said our goodbyes in the restaurant's parking lot. She hugged me again, that same brief, obligatory embrace, and told me how much she'd enjoyed dinner. Michael kissed my cheek and promised to call me over the weekend. As I drove home through the quiet Portland streets, I couldn't stop thinking about Jessica's questions about selling the restaurant. There had been something in her tone, something that suggested she wasn't just making conversation. It felt like she was gathering information, though for what purpose, I couldn't imagine. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a few minutes, looking at the house Robert and I had bought 40 years ago. It wasn't much, a small two-bedroom craftsman with a garden I could barely keep up with anymore. But it was home, just like Magnolia's was home in a different way. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the rain that had started up again, I found myself thinking about the future Jessica had painted. A retirement filled with leisure and travel, free from the daily pressures of running a business. It sounded nice in theory, but it also sounded empty. What would I do with myself if I wasn't getting up every morning to check on the restaurant, to make sure the staff was ready for the day, to greet the regular customers who'd become like family over the years? I fell asleep still thinking about Jessica's smile when she'd asked about selling the restaurant. It had looked like the smile of someone who already knew the answer to her question, even if I didn't. The next few weeks passed normally, or at least what I thought was normal. Michael called regularly. Jessica sent polite text messages asking about my health. And life at Magnolia's continued its familiar rhythm. We had our usual crowd of regulars. Mrs. Patterson, who came in every Tuesday for our meatloaf special. The Thompson family, who celebrated every birthday and anniversary at table 12. The group of retired teachers who met for coffee and gossip every Thursday morning. But I started noticing things that hadn't been there before. Small things that made me feel like I was being watched. Jessica began showing up at the restaurant unexpectedly. The first time was on a Thursday afternoon during our slow period between lunch and dinner. I was in the kitchen reviewing inventory when Amy, one of my servers, came back to tell me that my daughter-in-law was at table 6 and wanted to speak with me. I found Jessica sitting alone, impeccably dressed as always, studying the restaurant with the kind of intense focus I'd seen real estate developers use when they were evaluating properties. She had a small notebook open beside her coffee cup, and I could see she'd been writing in it. "Jessica, what a lovely surprise. I didn't know you were in the neighborhood." She looked up with that practiced smile. "I had a client meeting nearby and thought I'd stop in for a quick coffee. I hope that's okay." "Of course it's okay. This is your family's restaurant too. Can I get you anything else? Maybe a slice of our apple pie? It's fresh from this morning." "Oh no, thank you. I'm watching my figure." She patted her already flat stomach. But I was curious about something. How many people would you say this place seats? It was an odd question, but I answered it. "We have seating for 78 people when we're at full capacity." "Why do you ask?" "No reason, really. I was just thinking about what you said the other night, about the restaurant being a place where the community gathers. I wanted to get a better sense of the scope of what you've built here." She stayed for another 20 minutes, asking casual questions about our busiest times, our annual revenue, how many employees we had. Questions that seemed innocent enough on their own. But together, they painted a detailed picture of the business. The kind of picture someone would need if they were, well, if they were planning something. After she left, I found myself feeling unsettled. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. Jessica was family, and she was probably just trying to show more interest in my work. But the notebook bothered me. Why would someone need to take notes during a casual visit? 2 weeks later, she showed up again, this time with a man I didn't recognize. He was in his 50s, wearing an expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase that looked like it cost more than most people's monthly rent. Jessica introduced him as a friend from work. But something about the way he studied the restaurant's layout made me think he was more than that. They sat at a corner table, and I watched them through the kitchen service window as they talked in low voices. The man kept gesturing around the restaurant, pointing at different areas, and Jessica kept nodding and writing in that same notebook. At one point, he pulled out what looked like architectural drawings and spread them on the table. I was so focused on watching them that I almost didn't notice when Mrs. Patterson came in for her usual Tuesday meatloaf. She's been coming to Magnolia's for 15 years, and I pride myself on remembering every regular customer's preferences. "The usual spot, Mrs. Patterson?" I asked, gesturing toward her favorite table by the window. "Actually, Margaret, I was hoping we could talk privately for a minute." Mrs. Patterson is 72 and has lived in the neighborhood longer than anyone. She's the kind of woman who knows everything that happens within a 10-block radius, and her serious expression told me this wasn't going to be a casual conversation. We stepped into my small office behind the kitchen, and she closed the door carefully. "I don't like to gossip," she began, which immediately told me that gossip was exactly what this was about. "But I've been hearing things around the neighborhood that I thought you should know." My heart started beating faster. "What kind of things?" "Well, Sarah Martinez, she works at the planning office downtown. She mentioned that someone's been asking questions about this property, about zoning regulations and development permits. Someone who matches your daughter-in-law's description." I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. "Are you sure?" Sarah was pretty specific. A young Asian woman with expensive clothes and a fancy car. She came in with some developer type, asking about what it would take to get approval for a high-rise apartment complex on this block. The pieces were starting to fall into place, and I didn't like the picture they were forming. Jessica's questions about retirement, her sudden interest in the restaurant's capacity and revenue, the mystery man with the architectural drawings. "There's more," Mrs. Patterson continued. "My nephew works at First National Bank, and he said someone matching Jessica's description has been asking about commercial property loans. Big ones." I thanked Mrs. Patterson for the information, though part of me wished she'd never told me. Sometimes ignorance really is bliss. After she left, I sat in my office staring at the wall covered with photos from 30 years of Magnolia's history. Pictures of birthday parties and anniversary celebrations, of staff Christmas parties and community fundraisers. All the moments that had made this place more than just a business. That evening, I called Michael. "Hi, Mom. What's up? You sound worried." I almost told him everything right then. About Jessica's visits, about the man with the architectural drawings, about what Mrs. Patterson had heard at the planning office. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the exhaustion in his voice. Or maybe it was the knowledge that this conversation would force him to choose between his mother and his wife. "I was just wondering if you and Jessica would like to come for dinner Sunday. I could make that pot roast you used to love when you were little." "That sounds great, Mom. I'll check with Jessica and get back to you." But Saturday morning, Jessica called instead of Michael. "Margaret, I'm so sorry, but we're going to have to skip dinner tomorrow. Michael's not feeling well, and I think he's coming down with something. Rain check?" Her voice sounded different somehow. More confident, maybe even a little triumphant. Like someone who just won a game I didn't even know we were playing. That afternoon, I decided to drive by their apartment. I told myself I was just concerned about Michael's health, that I wanted to drop off some homemade soup. But really, I think I was looking for proof that my growing suspicions were justified. Their building was one of those modern complexes that had sprung up all over Portland in recent years. All glass and steel, with a doorman and valet parking. I sat in my car across the street, feeling foolish but unable to leave. And then I saw them, Michael and Jessica, walking out of the building together. He looked perfectly healthy, laughing at something she was saying. They got into Jessica's silver BMW and drove off in the direction of downtown. They weren't sick. They had lied to me. I followed them, keeping a safe distance, feeling like a character in one of those detective shows I sometimes watched late at night. They drove to a part of downtown I rarely visited anymore, an area that had been gentrified over the past decade. Expensive condos, trendy restaurants, art galleries that sold paintings for more than most people made in a year. They parked in front of a glass office building and went inside. Through the lobby windows, I could see them talking to a receptionist, then disappearing into an elevator. I sat in my car for over an hour, watching the building's entrance. When they finally emerged, Jessica was carrying a folder thick with documents, and both of them looked satisfied. Whatever meeting they'd had, it had gone well. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the folder Jessica had been carrying, about the lies they'd told, about the questions she'd been asking. I found myself wondering if I really knew my son at all, or if marriage had changed him into someone I no longer recognized. Sunday morning brought an unexpected visitor. Detective Raymond Walsh from the Portland Police Bureau knocked on my door at 9 a.m., his badge visible in his jacket pocket. "Mrs. Whitfield? I'm Detective Walsh. I was hoping I could ask you a few questions about your restaurant." My blood ran cold. "Is something wrong? Has there been a break-in?" "No, ma'am, nothing like that. We've been investigating some irregularities in commercial property transactions downtown, and your restaurant came up in our research. May I come in?" We sat in my living room, and Detective Walsh explained that they'd been tracking a scheme involving fraudulent property sales. Developers would target older business owners, pressure them to sell, then use forged documents to transfer properties at below-market prices. "We've had reports of someone posing as a family member or close friend to gain access to property information," he said. "Someone who matches the description of a young Asian woman, often accompanied by a man in his 50s who claims to be a business consultant." My heart started pounding so hard, I was sure he could hear it. "Have you had anyone unusual asking questions about your property recently? Anyone showing unexpected interest in your business operations?" I thought about Jessica's notebook, about her questions, about the man with the architectural drawings. But I also thought about Michael, about how this information could destroy his marriage and maybe his happiness. I'm not sure," I said finally. "Can you be more specific about what kind of questions?" Detective Walsh described exactly what Jessica had been doing. The visits to the planning office, the meetings with developers, the detailed inquiries about seating capacity and revenue. It was all part of a pattern they'd seen before. "Mrs. Whitfield, I have to ask, do you have any family members who might have access to this kind of information about your business?" I looked at this kind detective, who was trying to protect me from being victimized, and I realized I had a choice to make. I could protect Jessica and potentially lose everything my husband and I had built together. Or I could protect myself and potentially lose my son. "Yes," I said quietly. "I think I might." I told Detective Walsh everything. About Jessica's visits, about the notebook, about the man with the architectural drawings, about the lies and the secret meetings and the folder full of documents. As I spoke, I watched his expression grow more serious. "Mrs. Whitfield, I think your daughter-in-law may be involved in this scheme. We're going to need you to help us gather evidence." "What kind of evidence?" "The next time she visits your restaurant, we'd like you to wear a recording device. Get her to talk about her plans for the property. Ask direct questions about what she's been doing." The thought of betraying Jessica, even if she was betraying me, made me feel sick. But the thought of losing magnolias, of seeing 30 years of work disappear because I was too afraid to protect myself, made me feel worse. What about my son? He has no idea what's happening. That's something you'll have to decide how to handle. But Mrs. Whitfield, if she's planning what we think she's planning, waiting too long could mean losing everything. After Detective Walsh left, I sat in my empty house and wondered how my life had become so complicated. A week ago, my biggest worry was training new servers and planning the spring menu. Now I was contemplating wearing a wire to record my own daughter-in-law. That evening, Jessica called. "Margaret, I was thinking we should reschedule that dinner. Maybe we could meet at Magnolia's instead. I'd love to see the restaurant during dinner service, get a feel for how busy it gets." Her timing was almost too perfect. Like she knew I'd spent the day talking to the police, like she was testing me somehow. "That sounds lovely, dear. When did you have in mind?" "How about Tuesday night, around 7? Tuesday works perfectly." After I hung up, I realized that my hands were shaking. In 48 hours, I would either prove that my daughter-in-law was trying to steal my life's work, or I would discover that I'd become a paranoid old woman who saw conspiracies where none existed. Either way, nothing would ever be the same. Tuesday arrived with the kind of spring rain that makes Portland famous. Heavy drops that turned the world gray and made everyone walk a little faster, hunching their shoulders against the dampness. I spent the morning at Magnolia's trying to act normal, but my staff could tell something was wrong. "Mrs. Whitfield, you've checked the salt shakers 3 times already," Amy said gently. "Are you feeling all right?" I was wearing the recording device Detective Walsh had given me, a tiny thing no bigger than a button, hidden inside my blouse. It felt like it weighed 100 pounds, and I was convinced everyone could see it. "I'm fine, dear. Just want everything to be perfect tonight. My daughter-in-law is coming for dinner." At 6:30, I positioned myself at the hostess station with a clear view of the entrance. The dinner rush was in full swing. Nearly every table occupied, the kitchen humming with activity, the familiar sounds of conversation and clinking silverware that had been the soundtrack of my life for 30 years. Jessica arrived precisely at 7, and I was struck again by how perfectly put together she always looked. Even in the rain, her hair was flawless, her makeup impeccable. She wore a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, paired with heels that clicked authoritatively against the hardwood floors. "Margaret, thank you so much for making time for this. The place looks absolutely packed. Business must be booming." She said it with a smile, but I caught something else in her voice. Calculation. Like she was mentally counting dollar signs. I led her to a quiet table in the corner, the same spot where she'd sat with the mysterious man a few weeks earlier. As we walked through the restaurant, I noticed how her eyes moved constantly, taking in details. The number of servers, the efficiency of the kitchen, the way customers interacted with the staff. "This is quite an operation you have here," she said as we settled into our seats. "How many people do you employ?" The question was innocent enough, but Detective Walsh had warned me that details about staffing costs were often used to calculate a business's overhead expenses. "It varies depending on the season," I said carefully. "We have our core team of 8 full-time employees, and we bring in part-time help during busy periods." Jessica nodded and pulled out her phone, ostensibly to check messages, but I noticed she seemed to be making notes. Our server approached. Sarah, who'd been with us for 6 years and knew the menu better than I did. Jessica ordered the salmon again, though I'd noticed she barely touched it last time. I ordered my usual, the chicken and dumplings that had been on our menu since opening day. "So," Jessica said after Sarah left, "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation the other night, about retirement and what that might look like for you." Here it comes, I thought. My heart started beating so fast, I was worried the recording device would pick up the sound. "Oh, have you? I've actually been doing some research," she continued, leaning forward conspiratorially. "Do you know what this property is worth in today's market? I've never really thought about it. This is my home, not an investment." Jessica's smile became more intense. "But Margaret, it could be both. I had a friend in real estate take a look at the area, and he thinks this block could be worth millions to the right developer." Millions? I tried to sound surprised, though Detective Walsh had already explained how the scheme worked. They would inflate the property's potential value to make their eventual offer seem generous. "Absolutely. The city is desperate for high-density housing, and this location is perfect. Close to downtown, good public transportation, established neighborhood character that would attract young professionals." She pulled out her phone and showed me what looked like architectural renderings. They were detailed drawings of a 20-story apartment complex that would occupy the entire block where Magnolia's currently stood. "Imagine," she said, her voice taking on the tone of someone selling a dream. "Instead of working 12-hour days and worrying about payroll and health department inspections, you could be traveling the world. You could buy a nice condo in Florida, spend your winters somewhere warm." "But what about all of this?" I gestured around the restaurant. "What about our customers, our employees, this community?" Jessica's expression flickered slightly, and for just a moment, I saw something cold behind her eyes. "Margaret, you can't hold on to the past forever. Neighborhoods change, businesses evolve. The people who eat here will find other places to go. And honestly, most of them would probably prefer something more modern anyway." She said it so casually, dismissing 30 years of relationships and memories like they were obstacles to be cleared away. "Besides," she continued, "think about what this could mean for Michael and me. We could use the money to buy a bigger place, maybe start a family. Wouldn't you want to help secure your son's future?" There it was. The manipulation I'd been expecting, using my love for Michael as a weapon against me. "What exactly are you proposing, Jessica?" She reached into her purse and pulled out a folder, the same one I'd seen her carrying after their secret meeting downtown. "I've been working with a development company that specializes in these kinds of transitions. They handle everything: the paperwork, the permits, the construction permits. All you have to do is sign a few documents, and they take care of the rest." She opened the folder and spread several official-looking papers across the table. Even without reading them carefully, I could see they were property transfer agreements, architectural permits, and what looked like a check for a substantial amount of money. "They're prepared to offer you $2.5 million for the property," she said, watching my face carefully for my reaction. "Cash. You could have the money in your account within 30 days. It was a fortune, more money than I'd ever imagined having. But Detective Walsh had explained that these initial offers were always generous. It was how they gained victims' trust before the real fraud began." "This seems very sudden," I said. "I haven't even decided if I want to sell." "But Margaret, opportunities like this don't come along often. The development company has other properties they're considering, and if we don't move quickly, they might choose a different location." The pressure tactics were exactly what Detective Walsh had warned me about. Create urgency, make the victim feel like they had to decide immediately or lose out on a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I would need time to think about it, and I'd want to have my lawyer review any documents before I signed anything. Jessica's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course. But the thing is, they need a commitment by Friday. Just a preliminary agreement, nothing binding. Your lawyer can review everything after that, She pulled out a single sheet of paper and a pen. This is just a letter of intent. It doesn't obligate you to anything, but it shows good faith and keeps your spot in line. I looked at the paper. It was covered in legal language that was designed to confuse rather than clarify. But I could see enough to understand that it wasn't just a letter of intent. It was a binding agreement to sell the property for significantly less than the $2.5 million Jessica had mentioned. The actual sale price listed here is different from what you just told me, I said. For the first time since I'd known her, Jessica looked flustered. Oh, that's just... There are some fees and commissions that get deducted from the gross amount. The net to you is still what we discussed. But I could see the truth now. The whole elaborate setup, the pressure to sign quickly, the complicated documents designed to hide the real terms. Jessica wasn't trying to help me retire comfortably. She was trying to steal my restaurant. Who else knows about this? I asked. What do you mean? Does Michael know about your plans for the restaurant? Jessica's composure cracked completely. Michael? Michael doesn't understand the business world the way I do. He's too sentimental about this place. He'd never see the opportunity for what it really is. So he doesn't know. He doesn't need to know the details. Once everything is finalized, once you're enjoying your retirement and we're financially secure, he'll understand that this was the right decision for everyone. I realized in that moment that Jessica had never intended to include Michael in this scheme. She was planning to steal from his mother and then present him with a fait accompli, probably framing it as a generous gift she'd arranged for my retirement. Jessica, I said carefully, what happens if I decide I don't want to sell? Her mask slipped entirely then, and I saw who she really was underneath all the designer clothes and practiced smiles. Margaret, you're an old woman running a business in a neighborhood that's changing whether you like it or not. You can either be part of that change and profit from it, or you can be pushed aside by it. Those are your only options. Are you threatening me? I'm being realistic. This block is going to be developed with or without your cooperation. The city wants tax revenue, developers want profitable projects, and nobody cares about some old diner that serves the same boring food it's been serving for 30 years. The cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. This was my life she was talking about, my life's work. And to her, it was just an obstacle to be removed. What about our family? What about your marriage to my son? Jessica laughed, and it was the coldest sound I'd ever heard. Your son is a sweet man, but he's not ambitious. He's content to work his little tech job and come home to the same routine every night. I married him because he was stable and because his mother owned valuable real estate. I never expected it would take this long to convince you to be reasonable about it. The recording device felt like it was burning against my chest. Every word Jessica had spoken was being captured. Every casual admission of fraud and manipulation preserved for the police. So what happens now? I asked. Jessica gathered up the papers and put them back in the folder. Now you have until Friday to make the right decision. Sign the letter of intent and everyone gets what they want. Refuse and things become more complicated. Complicated how? Well, for instance, the health department might start getting anonymous complaints about food safety violations. The fire marshal might receive tips about overcrowding and safety hazards. The IRS might get curious about your tax returns from the past few years. She stood up, smoothing her dress with the calm confidence of someone who believed she held all the cards. Think about it, Margaret. You're 70 years old. I'm 63. You're getting older every day, and this business is more than you can handle. Take the money, enjoy your retirement, and let the next generation build something better in this space. She left without ordering dinner, without paying for her drink, without saying goodbye. I sat alone at the table, surrounded by the familiar sounds of my restaurant, trying to process what had just happened. My daughter-in-law had just revealed herself to be a criminal who was planning to steal my life's work and destroy my family in the process. And she'd done it all while I was wearing a wire that had recorded every word. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying Jessica's words over and over again. The casual cruelty of her dismissal of everything I'd built. The way she'd talked about Michael like he was just another asset to be managed. The threats disguised as friendly advice. But what kept me awake more than anything was the knowledge that I now had a choice to make that would change everything. I could turn the recording over to Detective Walsh and watch Jessica get arrested for attempted fraud. But that would also mean watching my son's world collapse around him. Wednesday morning came too soon. I called Detective Walsh and arranged to meet him at a coffee shop downtown, away from the restaurant and away from any chance of being seen by Jessica or Michael. He listened to the recording with the intense focus of someone who'd heard similar stories too many times before. When it finished, he leaned back in his chair and shook his head. "She's good," he said. "Experienced. This isn't her first time running this kind of scheme." "What do you mean?" "We've been tracking similar frauds in Seattle and San Francisco. Same pattern. Target older business owners, use family connections to gain trust, apply pressure through fake deadlines and inflated offers. But this is the first time we've had someone recorded actually making the pitch." Detective Walsh explained that they'd been building a case against the development company Jessica was working with for months. The company existed only on paper. It was a front for a group that specialized in acquiring properties through fraud, then flipping them to legitimate developers for massive profits. "Your daughter-in-law is what we call a front person," he said. "She identifies targets, builds relationships, gathers information. Then she hands them off to the closer, probably that man you saw her with at the restaurant." "How many people have they done this to?" "At least 12 that we know of. Mostly elderly business owners who trusted the wrong person. They've stolen over $20 million in property value." The number was staggering. $20 million. 12 families destroyed. And Jessica was at the center of all of it. "What happens now?" "Now we arrest her. We have enough evidence from this recording to charge her with conspiracy to commit fraud, extortion, and probably a dozen other crimes. She's looking at serious prison time." I thought about Michael, about how he would feel when he learned that the woman he loved was a criminal who'd been using him to get to me. "Detective Walsh, is there any chance my son is involved in this?" He consulted his notes. "We've found no evidence that he knows anything about it. In fact, based on what she said on the recording, it sounds like she's been deliberately keeping him in the dark." That was something, at least. Michael was innocent, just a victim like me. "When will you arrest her?" "We're going to coordinate with the FBI. This crosses state lines, so it's a federal case. Probably tomorrow morning. We'll need you to testify eventually. But for now, your part is done." I drove home feeling like I was in a fog. Tomorrow, police would arrest my daughter-in-law for trying to steal my restaurant. By tomorrow night, my son would know that his marriage was built on lies and criminal conspiracy. Thursday morning, I was at Magnolia's by 6 a.m., going through the motions of preparing for another day. I kept checking my phone, waiting for the call that would tell me Jessica had been arrested. It came at 9:15. "Mrs. Whitfield? This is Detective Walsh. We have her in custody. She was arrested at her apartment about an hour ago." "What about Michael?" "He was there when we arrived. He's He's pretty shaken up. You might want to give him some time before you reach out." I thanked Detective Walsh and hung up, then sat in my office staring at the phone. Part of me wanted to call Michael immediately, to comfort him and explain what had happened. But another part of me knew he needed time to process this betrayal on his own. The call came 3 hours later. "Mom?" Michael's voice was barely above a whisper. "Can we talk?" "Of course, sweetheart. Do you want to come to the restaurant?" "Actually, could you come here? I don't think I can leave the apartment right now." I found him sitting in his living room, still wearing the clothes he'd slept in, surrounded by boxes of Jessica's belongings that the FBI had searched through during their investigation. He looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. "Mom, I don't understand what happened. The police said Jessica was trying to steal the restaurant, that she was part of some criminal organization." I sat beside him on the couch and took his hand. "I'm so sorry, Michael. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. Did you know? Did you suspect something?" I told him everything. About Jessica's visits to the restaurant, about the questions she'd been asking, about the meeting with Detective Walsh and the recording device. I watched his face as he processed each revelation, saw the moment when he realized that everything he'd believed about his marriage was a lie. "She never loved me," he said finally. "She married me to get to you, to get to the restaurant." I don't know what was in her heart, Michael. Maybe some of it was real. But even as I said it, I remembered Jessica's cold laugh, her casual dismissal of him as unambitious and content with routine. 3 years, he said. 3 years of my life with someone who was planning to destroy our family. We sat in silence for a long time. Outside, Portland was going about its normal Thursday business. But inside that apartment, Michael's world had ended. "What happens now?" he asked eventually. "Now we move forward. The restaurant is safe, you're safe, and Jessica can't hurt anyone else. But how do I trust anyone again? How do I know that the next person I meet isn't just using me for something?" It was a question I couldn't answer. Trust, once broken so completely, doesn't heal easily or quickly. Over the next few weeks, the full scope of Jessica's crimes became clear. She was part of a sophisticated fraud ring that had been operating across the West Coast for 5 years. The FBI had been tracking them, using my case as the key evidence they needed to bring down the entire organization. Jessica was charged with 23 felony counts, including fraud, conspiracy, extortion, and money laundering. The trial was set for 6 months later, and I would have to testify about everything that had happened. Michael filed for divorce immediately. The marriage was annulled within 60 days. Apparently, marrying someone under false pretenses for criminal purposes invalidates the entire union. But the legal resolution didn't heal the emotional damage. Michael moved back to Portland from Seattle, partly to be closer to me during the trial, but mostly because he said he needed to be around people who actually loved him. He took a job with a local tech company at a fraction of his previous salary, but he seemed more at peace than I'd seen him in years. "I keep thinking about all the signs I missed," he told me one evening as we were closing Magnolias together. He'd started helping out at the restaurant again, just like when he was a teenager. The way she never wanted to hear stories about my childhood, how she'd change the subject whenever I talked about you or the restaurant, how she was always pushing me to ask you about retirement. "You loved her," I said. "When you love someone, you want to believe the best about them. But I should have seen it. I should have protected you. You couldn't have known. She was very good at what she did." The trial was everything I'd expected and worse. Jessica's defense attorney tried to paint her as the victim of an abusive relationship with the real criminal masterminds. She claimed she'd been coerced into participating, that she'd tried to back out multiple times, that she'd never intended to hurt anyone. But the recording device had captured her true nature. The jury heard her threatening me, dismissing my life's work as worthless, talking about Michael like he was just another mark to be used and discarded. She was convicted on all 23 counts and sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The judge said her case was one of the most callous examples of elder fraud he'd ever seen. After the trial, Michael and I drove to the coast and walked on the beach for hours without talking. When we finally spoke, it was about the future. "I want to learn the restaurant business," he said. "Really learn it, not just help out on weekends. I want to understand what you and Dad built here." "Are you sure? It's hard work, long hours, and not much money compared to what you were making in tech." "Mom, I've spent the last 3 years married to someone who thought success meant stepping on other people to get what you want. I want to build something real, something that matters to people." 6 months later, Michael became my full partner in Magnolia's. We expanded our catering business and added a weekend brunch menu that became popular with the young families moving into the neighborhood. He brought his technical skills to updating our reservation system and online presence, while I taught him everything I knew about running a kitchen and managing staff. On quiet evenings after we'd closed, we would sit at the same corner table where Jessica had tried to convince me to sign away my life's work, and we'd plan improvements to the restaurant. New dishes to try, ways to make the space more welcoming, ideas for community events we could host. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if she'd succeeded?" Michael asked one night. I looked around at the restaurant that had been my life for 30 years, at the photos on the walls showing decades of celebrations and gatherings, at the worn wooden floors that had been walked on by thousands of customers who'd become friends, at the kitchen where I'd taught my son the same lessons about hard work and integrity that his father had taught him. "She never could have succeeded," I said, "because what she was trying to steal isn't something that can be put on paper or sold to developers. It's the relationships we've built, the trust we've earned, the memories we've created. You can't fraud your way into that." Today, 5 years later, Magnolia's is busier than ever. Michael met a wonderful woman named Sarah, who's a teacher at the local elementary school. She comes in every Tuesday for our meatloaf special, just like Mrs. Patterson used to before she moved to assisted living. Michael and Sarah are getting married next spring, and they've asked to have their reception in the restaurant. I still think about Jessica sometimes, wondering what drove her to choose deception over honest work, manipulation over genuine relationships. But mostly I think about how grateful I am that her scheme failed, not just because I kept my restaurant, but because it brought Michael and me closer together than we'd ever been. He's 39 now, with gray starting to show at his temples. And he's become everything I hoped he would be when he was a little boy, helping me set up tables on Sunday mornings. Honest, hardworking, kind to customers and staff alike. The kind of man his father would be proud of. Last week, a young couple came in, asking if we were interested in selling the restaurant. They said they represented developers who were looking to modernize the neighborhood. I listened politely to their pitch, then told them Magnolia's wasn't for sale. "But ma'am," the young woman said, "you could make a fortune if you sold now. This whole block is going to be developed eventually." I smiled and handed her a menu. "Would you like to try our Thursday special? It's been popular with our customers for 30 years. Some things are worth more than money. Some places